Every Christmas, someone paid his rent. The first Christmas after his wife died, David Miller had exactly $43 left in his bank account. His rent was due in 6 days. His 2 children were asleep upstairs, and David was sitting alone at the kitchen table, trying to decide which bill he could afford not to pay. Then, the next morning, his landlord told him something impossible. "David, your January rent has already been paid." David stared at him. Paid? By who? The landlord shook his head. They asked to remain anonymous. David had no idea that the same thing was about to happen. Every Christmas, for the next 11 years. And when he finally discovered who had been paying his rent, the truth would change the way he understood his wife, his family, and one promise that had been quietly traveling from person to person for decades. David Miller had never expected to raise 2 children alone. He and his wife, Emily, had built the kind of life that looked ordinary from the outside and perfect from the inside. They lived in a modest rental home outside Pittsburgh. David worked as a warehouse supervisor. Emily worked part-time at a local elementary school. They didn't have much money, but they had Sunday pancakes, Friday movie nights, road trips that usually ended with someone getting lost. And every December, Emily somehow made their little house feel warmer than any place David had ever known. Christmas was her favorite time of year. She decorated too early, played the same old songs every morning, and every year she insisted on buying one extra gift. David once asked her who it was for. Emily smiled. "Someone who might need Christmas a little more than we do." David thought it was just another one of Emily's traditions. He never asked again. Then everything changed. Emily became seriously ill. Within months, hospital visits replaced movie nights. David took extra shifts. Savings disappeared. Bills arrived faster than he could open them. And one cold October morning, Emily was gone. David was 38. His son, Tyler, was 9. His daughter, Grace, was 6. For weeks, David barely remembered how to function. But children still needed breakfast. Laundry still needed washing. School still started every morning. And bills didn't care that someone was grieving. By December, David was exhausted. He had missed work several times during Emily's final months. His savings account was almost empty. And for the first time in his adult life, David realized he might not be able to pay rent. He hid it from the children. When Tyler asked if Christmas would be different that year, David forced a smile. "No, your mom wouldn't allow that." So David bought a tiny artificial tree from a thrift store. Grace made paper snowflakes. Tyler found Emily's old Christmas lights in a box. Half of them didn't work. They hung them anyway. On Christmas morning, there were only a few small presents under the tree. But the children smiled. And for a few hours, David almost believed they were going to be okay. Then, December 26th arrived. And reality returned. David drove to the property office with $43 in his bank account and a speech rehearsed in his head. He would ask for 2 extra weeks, maybe 3. He hated the idea, but he had no other choice. The landlord, Mr. Harris, looked at the computer. Then he frowned. David's stomach dropped. But Mr. Harris wasn't looking at him with anger. He looked confused. "David, you don't owe anything for January." David thought he'd misheard him. "What?" "January is paid." David stared at the screen. "That can't be right." Mr. Harris checked again. "It was paid yesterday." "By who?" Mr. Harris hesitated. "They specifically requested that I not tell you." David laughed nervously. "Come on, Bill. I'm serious. Was it someone from Emily's family?" "I can't say." David stood there for several seconds. Then he slowly put his wallet back into his pocket. He walked outside, sat inside his car, and cried. Not because the rent was paid, But because for the first time since Emily died, David felt like someone had seen him struggling, someone new, and they had helped without asking for anything in return. He spent the next several weeks trying to figure out who it was. His parents denied it. Emily's sister denied it. Friends denied it. David eventually convinced himself that someone simply wanted to help after Emily's death. A one-time act of kindness. He was grateful. And then life moved forward. Slowly. Painfully. One day at a time. The following year wasn't easy, but it was better. David returned to full-time work. Tyler started playing baseball. Grace learned to ride a bicycle. The house slowly began to sound like a home again. Then December came. David didn't think about the anonymous payment, not until he opened his January rent statement. Balance due, $0. David immediately called Mr. Harris. "Did someone pay my rent again?" "Yes." "The same person?" Mr. Harris paused. "Yes." David couldn't understand it. He didn't need as much help this time. He could pay the rent. So he asked Mr. Harris to return the money. A few days later, Mr. Harris called him. They refused. David asked if he could at least send a thank you letter. The answer came back. No. No name, no letter, no recognition. Only one request. Tell David to use the money for his children. That Christmas, David used part of what he had saved for rent to buy Tyler a new baseball glove. Grace got the bicycle she'd been asking for, but David saved most of the money. Something about spending it felt wrong. Then another year passed, and another Christmas arrived. January rent, paid. Third year, same person. David stopped calling Mr. Harris, but his curiosity grew. Whoever was doing this wasn't helping him through one difficult Christmas. They had made a decision, a commitment. Year 4, paid. Year 5, paid. Year 6, paid. Every December, David began wondering whether it would happen again. And every January, the balance was 0. The tradition became something his children knew about too. When Tyler was 14, he asked, "Dad, who keeps doing this?" David smiled. "I wish I knew." Grace had her own theory. Maybe Mom sent somebody. David laughed, but the sentence stayed with him. Maybe Mom sent somebody. By the 7th Christmas, David's life looked completely different. He had been promoted. He was earning more money. The family had moved to a slightly larger rental property owned by the same company. Tyler was preparing for college. Grace had become the kind of teenager who seemed to have 1,000 plans for her future. David no longer needed help paying rent. So that December, he called Mr. Harris. "If they try to pay this year, please tell them I don't need it anymore." Mr. Harris promised he would. 2 days later, he called David back. "They already know. And they still want to pay." "Why?" "They said that's not the point." David was silent. "What is the point?" Mr. Harris answered quietly. "They said one day, you'll understand." January arrived. Paid. David took the exact amount of money he would have spent on rent and donated it anonymously to a local family whose father had recently lost his job. He told no one. For the first time, David understood something. Maybe the money wasn't supposed to stop with him. Years 8, 9, and 10 passed. Every Christmas, the same thing. By now, Tyler was away at college. Grace was preparing to graduate high school. David had become operations manager at the warehouse. He could easily afford his rent. Yet somewhere out there, someone continued keeping a promise David didn't understand. Then came Christmas number 11. David was 50 years old. Tyler came home from college. Grace was starting her first year at a university nearby. They decorated the tree together. And while hanging one of Emily's old ornaments, Grace said, "Do you think they'll do it again?" David looked at her. I don't know. She smiled. They will. She was right. January was paid. 11 Christmases. 11 anonymous payments. David decided that enough was enough. He asked Mr. Harris for one favor. Don't tell me their name. Just give them my phone number. A week passed. No call. 2 weeks. Nothing. Eventually, David stopped waiting. Then came the 12th Christmas. The children were both home. The house was filled with food, laughter, and music. David thought about Emily often that evening. He imagined how proud she would have been of Tyler, of Grace, of the family they had somehow managed to keep together. On December 26th, David checked the rent account. For the first time in 12 years, there was a balance. Nothing had been paid. David stared at the screen. He felt strangely disappointed, not because of the money. He didn't need it, but something that had become part of his life had suddenly ended. David told himself it was probably for the best. Maybe whoever had been helping him had finally decided he was okay. And they were right. David was okay. 3 days later, an envelope arrived. No return address. Inside was a handwritten note. David read the first sentence twice. The woman who paid your rent every Christmas for 11 years passed away yesterday. David sat down. Grace noticed his expression. What is it? He handed her the letter. Beneath the sentence was an address and 4 words. She wanted you to come. The next afternoon, David, Tyler, and Grace drove almost an hour outside Pittsburgh. The address led them to a small brick house at the edge of an old neighborhood. David knocked. A man in his late 60s opened the door. David Miller? David nodded. The man looked at Tyler and Grace. For a moment, his eyes filled with tears. Come inside. His name was Robert. The woman who had been paying David's rent was his wife. Her name was Margaret. Robert led them into the living room. On a small table sat a wooden box. She left this for you. David opened it. Inside were 11 envelopes, 11 rent receipts, one for every Christmas, and underneath them, an old photograph. David picked it up. His heart stopped. Emily. She couldn't have been more than 19 or 20. She stood outside a college building beside a young woman. The woman was Margaret. David looked at Robert. How did they know each other? Robert sat down. And finally, David heard the story. More than 20 years earlier, Emily had been a college student. Her family had very little money. She worked nights at a restaurant and attended classes during the day. Then one winter, everything went wrong. Her car broke down. She lost several shifts at work. Tuition was due, and Emily was preparing to leave college. Margaret worked in the university library. She barely knew Emily, but she'd noticed the young woman studying there almost every night until closing. One evening, Margaret found Emily crying quietly at a table. Emily finally admitted what was happening. She couldn't afford tuition, groceries, and rent. Something had to go. And she had decided it would be college. The next morning, Margaret paid the remaining amount Emily needed. Emily was stunned. She promised she would repay every dollar. Margaret refused. Instead, she told Emily something she never forgot. One day, when you can help somebody else. David stared at the photograph. Robert continued. Years later, Margaret heard that Emily had died. She learned that Emily had left behind a husband and 2 young children. Margaret remembered the struggling college student she'd once helped. So she called David's landlord. She paid January's rent. She intended to do it only once. But the following Christmas, she thought about Tyler and Grace. So she did it again. Then again. And eventually, it became her Christmas tradition. David's voice shook. Why didn't she ever tell me? Robert smiled. Because she said if you knew who she was, you'd think you owed her something. David looked down. And she didn't want that? No. Robert paused. She wanted you to understand it someday. Then Robert reached deeper into the wooden box. There is something else. He handed David a second photograph. It showed Emily standing beside another woman and two small children. David had never seen them before. Then Robert gave him a letter. This one was in Emily's handwriting. David immediately recognized it. The letter had been written nearly 13 years earlier, before Emily became ill. David began reading. And suddenly, everything changed again. Emily wrote that years after Margaret helped her, she had finally found her own opportunity to keep the promise. Every Christmas, Emily had quietly helped another family in their town. A single mother with two children, sometimes groceries, sometimes heating bills, sometimes Christmas presents, and once, their rent. David remembered Emily's mysterious extra Christmas gift. Someone who might need Christmas a little more than we do. It had never been one gift. Emily had been keeping Margaret's promise, year after year, and David had never known. The letter ended with one request. If you ever discover this, don't pay anyone back. Find someone who needs the next chapter. David lowered the letter. Grace was crying. Tyler looked away toward the window. And suddenly David understood the 11 years of rent payments. Margaret hadn't been paying a debt. Emily hadn't been paying a debt. There had never been a debt. There was only a promise. Moving forward.
1 year later.